Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you today. We are going to get into part 2 of the role of adversity in personal development. It was so good after the first episode, we decided let's keep going. So I am stoked for this. We're going to bypass the intros, but while I am excited, y'all should be too. Make sure you're doing the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for the Collective and Wednesdays for the Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, by all means, put them in the comment section. We can engage those throughout, and I am stoked to get into this. So now we were talking about, at the end of the last show, we were talking about how adversity is the key element in personal development. And where I wanted to take this is the next space of how we actually engage the differences in people, the differences in environments, and how they approach adversity. So the way we look at it in the military is different than the way people in the police look at it, different than in athletics, different in civilian environments, different in family environments. And I'm wondering, how have you, each of you, approached the differences throughout your life as you've moved from environment to environment to environment? Seb, I'm coming to you first. What do you got?
Shocking. You know, the first thing that comes to mind is this. When you say it's different, it's more the technical knowledge piece that's different. It's not so much that adversity itself is different, because adversity doesn't change. The way we process it does. Adversity is the same, whether you're in a military context. It might be amplified, or it might be intensified on account of the circumstances that you're in. You know, maybe if they're more egregious or if they're more grievous, so to speak, it will intensify the experience. But really, adversity is adversity. And that is precisely why people that have made a living out of overcoming incredible odds and adversity are very good at coaching people that haven't, right? In other context of life, not necessarily in the military or police or special operation context. And so, the first thing that come to mind for me is this. And so the technical piece is the technical knowledge that you acquire through skills, knowledge, and experience that allows you to address it in a certain way or not, or the information that you obtain through research or whatever the case may be, is my first thoughts on that.
I like it. Trav, what are your first thoughts on this?
Yeah, Seb's right. Adversity is adversity, but what's adversity to Seb might not be the same as what's adversity to you or to me. How we perceive adversity is how we're going to respond to it. So if we've got a high threshold of adversity, a lot of adversity that we've encountered in the past, it kind of primes us to be able to deal with it in the future, provided we have dealt with it in a healthy and proper way in the past. That whole what doesn't kill me makes me stronger Nietzsche quote is true if you're able to properly frame your adversity in a way that you can move forward in a healthy way. Otherwise, it piles on and it piles on and it piles on, and it doesn't make you better. And it can kill you. So I think those who have had a fair bit of adversity in the past, as well as the tools, or at least the experience of being able to deal with that adversity in a positive way, are going to be better suited as they move forward. So if they're in the military, there's shared adversity and there's success, and they learn a structure of how they can work with that adversity for the benefit of themselves and others. They get out into the civilian world, you might lack that support network, and the adversity that you're encountering can be completely different. But if you're able to remember that how you dealt with the past adversity and apply that to the future, I think that just goes to Seb's point that adversity is adversity.
I like where this is going. Sean, what do you got?
So I am of the opinion that it doesn't matter who you are or what phase of life you're in. You're just simply in a process. And you either understand how to do the process well or not, but you should be learning how to be better at the process as you move through the phases of your life, or as you get older. And so a lot of people will say to me, it doesn't matter what they're doing. If they're doing a 1 kilometer run or a 10 kilometer run, they'll say, it was really hard, but then that's not a big deal to you. You know, it was only 10 kilometers, and 10 kilometers would be a joke to you. And I disagree, because adversity is adversity, as has been said. And it doesn't matter whether it's 1K, 10K, or a million kilometers that a person has to go. It's the level of suck that you can absorb, the level of adversity. And if you're tapping out at a 1 out of 10, and I'm tapping out at a 9 out of 10, we're both facing adversity, but you're only facing it at a 1 out of 10 when I know you've got a 9 out of 10 in you. But that doesn't mean that we'll tap at the same time. It just means that you're tapping out at a 1 out of 10 instead of a 9 out of 10. And why are you tapping out at a 1 out of 10? It's probably because you were tapping out before you got into whatever it is that you're getting into. Because if you're getting into something that you're really engaged in, that is meaningful, that is a strong why, you've got 7s and 8s and 9s in you out of 10 before you'll tap out of the moment. And so it doesn't matter who taps first. What does matter is why you tapped, and was it at a 1 out of 10 and a 9 out of 10? And that's for you to think about the why of the moment. Why was it a 9? Why was it a 1? And if it's a 1, again, I'll reiterate, it's probably because you weren't invested in the fullness of the moment.
It seems like it's almost like a framing issue more than it is the adversity itself, in that how we actually, whether or not we invest ourselves into the adversity itself. And I'm wondering, do you think that's an accurate statement, that it, instead of rather scaling the adversity itself, we should be scaling our reaction to it? Seb, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the best way to put it. I mean, it's a reframe, right? And there's only one person in control of that, and that's you. And trying to control external factors such as the adversity, the level of adversity that is upon you, or the level of adversity that you'll face as you start negotiating adversity itself. Can it get worse? Can it get, all of those things you will be at the mercy of if you wait for the external factors, or if you attempt to control the external factors. And ultimately what it does is create a ton of anxiety associated with that. And what makes adversity worse than the adversity that you're facing is anxiety about adversity you haven't even faced yet. And I can't remember if it was Marcus Aurelius who said that we suffer more in imagination than we do in real life. And that is a fact. It's true most of the time if we let ourselves. And so, I do believe it's an absolutely accurate statement.
I like it. It's interesting too, because the way he put that was perfect, because my son recently got stung by a wasp. Well, he got bitten by a wasp, and now he's like deathly afraid of being outside because there's wasps outside. And I've had to sit with him on the porch and let one fly around in front of us and let him kind of roll through the adversity of the moment and have him reframe it on his own. And he still struggles with it, but it's going to be a bit of a process to get him through it. I love it. Travis, you got any thoughts on this?
Just thinking of, I think it was Homer Simpson and Lisa, and something bad happened to Lisa. She's like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened. And Homer's like, this is the worst thing that's happened so far, Lisa. And, there's a lot of things that have been brought up. Back to Nietzsche again, he who has a why to live can suffer almost anyhow. So finding what that why is will help you with that how in the adversity. That's where having a framework, or people who've gone through adversity before, who can make excellent coaches, because they can go through the path that they went through, and maybe they can provide a little bit different perspective for you. I think there's a lot of power to the reframing and the perspective. I think there isn't a lot of difference between the psychophysiological response between fear and excitement. And I tell my kids, when they're fearful or feeling fearful about something, I ask them, I say, are you fearful or are you excited? Oh, no, I'm fearful. I said, what if you told yourself you're excited? How would that feel? And I'll do that for myself as well. If I'm looking at something that's like, holy crow, what might be adversity for one person, like maybe getting up in front of 100 people and giving a speech is just going to be the worst in the world. And for somebody else, it's a walk in the park, right? How do I reframe what I'm feeling right now? Is it fear or is it excitement? And when I get that feeling, I know that I'm alive. I know that I'm doing something that's pushing my boundaries, and I know I'm going to grow from it. And if I fail, every time I fail, that's just another stepping stone to a success. And if I can just continually mentally reframe these things for myself, I find that helps me. But I'm curious because Sean was talking about the process, and I firmly believe in that. I believe that how we deal with anything is how we deal with everything. And we start to develop a process that we can put in place. I'm wondering if we would want to talk about our process of how we encounter adversity and what that process looks like for each of us.
Let's do it.
Sorry
Sean?
to hijack, but it's just,
I like it.
I'm
I like
curious.
it. Let's do it. Sean, you're up. What do you got?
It's good. I like it. In fact, this segues really nicely into my day-to-day, today's day. And so I went out for a ride. It was only supposed to be about an hour, but it turned out to be 2 hours long. And it was starting to get close to the podcast. So I had to make I had to do some things that I shouldn't have had to do. And that included running with my bike for about 45 minutes with a flat tire to get back home in time. And so what had happened is I'd gone for my ride, and I was having a great ride, entering into a black diamond rock garden. And as I dropped down into it, my rear wheel spiked a triangular rock that was poking up out of the trail and carved a big hole in it. And I lost all my air, and that was it. That was me about to change a tire. So as I laid the bike down, I've got video footage of this as I go through the process of changing the tire, and I get right, and I've got air into my inner tube, and I'm about to change it, and I realize that my tire levers are missing to pull the tire off, because my son got a flat on his bike on the weekend, and he's got my tire repair kit. And so there I was out in the middle of a trail, Black Diamond Trail called Stardust, thinking, oh, well, now I get to walk my bike for the next 45 minutes to get home in time for the podcast. Now, normally that would be me bummed out because, well, it's a suck moment. I realized that there's a beautiful trail in front of me, like one of the best in the area. And I was walking on it and pushing my bike up it. And in my head, I was bummed out because I was missing out on this magnificent trail. But to Travis's point, it's all about reframing things. And so I can't take that flat tire and turn it into like, I love flat tires. They're awesome. What I did do was think about how I started my ride. And today's ride started off with a predetermined workout by me, and that was called hellacious uphill sprint intervals, which I've termed in the past as nauseatingly good. By the time I do my hill rep, I like to see a little bit of white dot. I like to see a little bit of stars. I like to be a little bit cronkified. And so the moment that I get my act together again, I hit it hard again. And so I'll do iterations until I feel semi-nauseous, and then I get on with the rest of my ride. So I'd already got that done at the start of the ride. And I dropped into this beautiful flowing black diamond, picked up my flat tire, went through the process, realized I had no tire levers to change anything, and then thought, oh man, now I'm walking my bike. And immediately after I said that, it wasn't, I love changing tires and I love walking my bike. It was, well, at least I'm not doing uphill sprint intervals right now with a flat tire. And so, it can always be worse. Things can always be worse. And we've talked about that in the past. It was in fact, Chance, I think you were talking about the chipmunk. You're in a defensive position with your buddy. It was really cold and you were enjoying the little moment with the chipmunk. Because, that's a nice moment. It is kind of uplifting to some degree. And then I had said, well, I prefer to look at things like, well, it could always be worse. It could be raining chipmunks right now on us. That would suck. And so that's the way I reframe things. When things are bad, I look at the moment and think, well, it could always be worse. And if I can't imagine a worse scenario, I then default to my other always part of my process, which is, I've faced worse in the past. And so it's either I know I've dealt with worse, or it could always be worse. So no matter what I'm in, I'll be okay with what I'm in through those two frameworks of future and past tense. Hope that makes sense.
Interesting. It's like reverse gratitude. Like having gratitude in the thing by realizing that it definitely could always be worse. Seb, what about your process? What do you got?
Some people might call that invalidation, and it's not. It's self-imposed perspective, and it's life-saving. You keep being a victim over there in the corner. So we'll see how that works out. So for me, I have three sort of phases when it comes to adversity. I have, and I call this the contact phases. So it's either pre-contact, contact, and post, right? And I will prepare these and respond to these different context, depending on what's going on, with that in mind. And so when it comes to preemptive, I think, and I've spoken about this extensively on this very platform, which is adversity is going to hit you. And if you don't prepare for it by self-imposing it and learning how to cope with it, you are going to get blindsided. And when you get blindsided, it's very difficult now that you're in an emotional state to try to make the decisions that are right for you, unless you have skills, knowledge, and abilities to tap into that allow you to wing it, right? And so, and you will get to a point where you absolutely can wing it. Just bring it on, right? And that's cool. But it's an acquired skill, right? Like, it takes time. And so when we look at preemptive preparation, I consistently look at all of the things that people typically do not like to look at. What if something goes wrong with my kid, with my wife, with my, it doesn't matter. Think about the harsh scenarios that life can throw at you, the harshest. And as you start engaging in this, and this is an important nuance here, because there are people out there that will increase their anxiety so much when they start mentally preparing for adversity that it has to be done in a very controlled way. And that's perhaps the time where you're doing it with a professional, where you're building that inoculation slowly, or you are doing it yourself slowly, realizing that if I impose too much upon myself right now in terms of imagination, I may create an adverse reaction, which is creating more anxiety and fixing less problems for something that you're likely never face. And so there's a balance there, but you get to a point where it doesn't matter how bad the scenario that you are envisioning is. It just doesn't. There's some of the scenarios I envision, I wouldn't even discuss them publicly, but they don't create an excessive amount of anxiety for me. They simply give me tools to understand how I'm expecting myself to react in the context. Now, when it happens, if you've prepared and if you've been there mentally, and this is techniques that are used by Olympians and everybody, right? And there's a variety of ways to do it. I like to immerse in all the different dimensions, the smells, the sound, the touch, the feel, the everything, and really say, how would this feel from a visceral standpoint if I was to X, Y, and Z? Something happens, and how would this feel? And how would I negotiate the emotions that I feel? And how would I negotiate my way forward? And how would I? So you actually give yourself some answers. And sometimes it takes a little bit of pondering, and it takes a little bit of time to just kind of sit there and mull it over. But eventually you will come up with a plan of action. Having no plans is the worst plan. We know that plans don't generally, go very well with first contact, but obviously it's a pre-made statement. And the reality is, if you don't plan at all, you're going to be far less effective in your application of your strategies. And so I start by envisioning all the things that most people are shying away from, what my expected reaction would be, or what I expect myself to be at whatever level that is, and how I would negotiate with the way forward, those types of things. I don't spend too much time on the way forward until I'm actually in adversity. So if something hits and adversity hits all of a sudden, my reframe is this is where ribbons are earned. You can talk a bit game, you can do whatever you want, you can be the top coach in the world, I don't care where you are. But when adversity hits hard, that is where the wheels meet the pavement. Let's see it. Let's see what happens. Do you crumble like a cheap house of cards, or are you in there reframing, trying to, get the positive out of this, trying to see what the way forward is going to look like, all of those things. And so for me, reminding myself that this is where ribbons are earned, or are earned rather, just give me that extra oomph, if you will, to engage in the adversity process and whatever is coming through. And it's easy to think to myself, like, look, and I can make up numbers. I can say 99% of people wouldn't even engage in this, or 99% of people wouldn't react this way, or whatever the case may be, whatever story you tell yourself, so that you give yourself a little boost on how capable you are in dealing with this. And then as soon as I acknowledge an emotion and I acknowledge the situation that I'm in, and how bad is it, and where am I going from here, and what does life look like going forward, now I flip it to action-based thoughts. So instead of just sitting there and mulling over, poor me, what's going on, it's like, what do I do to make this better? The fact that things have gotten bad, the ship has sailed. There is no changing that. So I'm done. That part is gone. It's behind me. So now forward. How do I engage in this, and where does that leave me? And how am I going to be the most effective in doing that moving forward? And then, of course, after, it's the post, and that's the reassessment. And if you've been on any tactical operation, you know that this happens all the time, right? Once you're done with the thing, now it's time to reassess the thing. What have I done correctly? What have I not done correctly? Is there areas of my mental prep that were lacking and I got blindsided because I had blind spots? Or was my response appropriate? Was my response beneficial? Is there anything I could have done differently? And so that's the reassessment phase of my adversity piece. And so, again, a protocol, right? And there's a lot of complexity attached with this. Like, for example, if I'm going to think about if I'm in the adversity process, or if I'm reevaluating, whatever the case may be, I may need a connection. I personally may need connection with nature, for example, in order to accomplish that. So I go out in the woods and I do my thinking better when I'm along the river or doing whatever, So that's part of the protocol as well. So context, technical knowledge, emotions, all of these things are sort of intertwined. And then how I'm going to go about conducting that introspection and really diving deep in is, for me, in nature. And so that's part of my protocol.
Love it. Love it. It's interesting because I have a 3-step process as well when I go through mine. But it's slightly different because I have to start with acceptance. My biggest struggle for many years was separating what was happening with what I wanted to have happen. And so I had expectations that weren't being met, and that would frazzle me, and then I wouldn't be able to manage what was going on. So my first step is always acceptance. I have to look at what is actually happening and go, yep, this is happening now. Okay. And then it begins the next process, which is this is where it counts. And I find that recently, this has been coming up more and more as I've been teaching more and more jiu-jitsu. A lot of people will be rolling, and they'll come up and be like, okay, I'm headed out. And I'm like, oh, one more? You got one more in you? And they're like, I don't have much left right now. And I'm like, well, these reps are the ones that count. Like, this is it right here. So do you want one more round? And then usually people will be like, yeah, all right, cool, let's do one more round. But I found that, especially when I'm in adverse mental states, I have to tell myself the same things. When I'm in a major depressive episode or something like that, I have to tell myself, these are where the reps count. What reps am I using right now? And I'll go through the similar processes of what are the tools I have, where can I engage them, am I doing them well, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then at the end of it, it's always gratitude. Always gratitude. I find something to be grateful for. And to your point, Sean, about the chipmunk, that was a small victory, small win in Wainwright. I was looking for one thing that I could be grateful for in that moment, and that was it, the chipmunk or the sunbeam or the whatever it was later on that day. Little things that you can find to kind of hold on to that you can appreciate in and of themselves. That's what I seek. That's my process. I go 1, 2, 3 throughout the whole thing. Travis or Sean, what do you got? Looks like you're sidling up to the mic.
Yeah, I am. And so I want to clear up something that I'm sure everyone understands out there, or we all of us definitely understand. And that is, everyone does it differently. The processes or not, to my point, I don't have a process per se. I don't have a 3-step process or a 9-step or a 2-step or any step. My process is simply this: it can always be worse. or I've faced worse. So I get to exist in the moment, and whatever, man, freaking bring it. Bring your hell times 10. Bring it. Whatever. I don't care. It is of no consequence to me, because it can always be worse, and I've faced worse. So I get to live in the moment and say, bring your worst. So until that shows up, I'll deal with the present, with the knowledge that it's either gonna get worse or I faced worse. Whatever, man. Who cares? But I don't have a process anymore. When I was young, I did. I had lots of ways to deal with adversity, lots of processes, to include a formal sequence of events. But now I don't. Now I just exist and let it come, and have faith that I've faced enough in life that I can manage it. I can deal with whatever. All of the demons. Bring them. And so I don't really focus too much on a step-by-step process anymore, though I'm not suggesting for a moment that it isn't valuable. I'm not suggesting that maybe I would benefit from it, but I just haven't done it for so long now, and I don't see me doing it in the future, that I'm just simply comfortable with letting it flow. And if anyone doesn't understand that, it's a hard thing to explain, except it takes time. It takes having a process for a long time, until finally, through Occam's razor, you whittle it down into an invisible part of your life that simply makes things happen.
This is a great point on the fact that, yes, not everyone's process is going to be the same, but also the fact that your process will change over time as you develop, as you get stronger, as you get better, as you learn more. So a fantastic point. Travis, what's your process?
Well, it was neat going last on this one and hearing everybody's 2 bits. It's kind of fun. I agree. Everybody will process it differently. Everyone is different. They're going to have a different makeup mentally. They're going to have different experiences, which will lead them to different conclusions. I do believe there is value in being able to look at how other people deal with adversity, especially if it's somebody that you admire and you can look at their approach. I think it is a folly to try and exactly follow that approach and expect the same results for yourself. It gives you a bit of a roadmap or a guideline that you can work on. And to Sean's point, as well as to Seb's point, Seb brought up winging it. Sean talks about how it's in his subconscious. You ask somebody, so you drove over here. How'd you do that? I don't know. I got in the car, turned it on, I drove here. It's all a part of the subconscious now. My daughter's learning to drive, and I'm sure if you asked her, she said, well, I accelerated slightly, I was up here, and she's got a process, and every little bit. I shoulder checked, I looked. After a while of working that process, it becomes subconscious. That winging it side of things, which can get easier as you work that process more, is, I think, based on a confidence in yourself and confidence in your approach in the process that you apply. And it does get easier. It can always be worse. It's like we're going through some heavy turbulence on a plane, and my wife is white knuckling it, and she's like, I don't like this. And I said, it could be worse. Like, think about it. What could be worse? She's like, well, yeah, I guess we could crash and all die. I'm like, no, we could crash and be horribly injured. We could be in a lot of pain, and we're all floating in the cold ocean for days waiting to be rescued. I'm like, but that's not happening right now. It's warm, it's air conditioned and the rest. And in the moment, I don't think it really helped her, but that mindset of it can always be worse or I've experienced worse is an important piece to the reframing. And that before, during, and after approach, or that 3-stage approach of looking at it, I think there's a reason why Michael Easter's comfort crisis struck a chord with so many people. People start looking at going on their own, what is that, a masogi, I think is the Japanese term for experiencing something where your number one rule is don't die, but make sure it's really difficult, because we've been living in a society where things have been coming to us rather easily, and failure is something that's looked at as a bad thing. It's being pulled away from people. You look at the kids, they get 8th, 12th place ribbons, and they've built failure into such a large thing that nobody dares go out and stick their neck out lest they fail. But if we start challenging ourselves as part of our before process in just little ways, we will build that confidence, which will allow us to wing it when something does come. If we shy away from those challenges in our day-to-day, when adversity does hit, it will seem overwhelming. If our challenges are strictly physical, or maybe we have some mental challenges, or whatever it might be, some emotional challenges that we've starting to accrue, and then something hits, I don't think there's a heck of a lot of value to worrying too much about all these different things that could happen. I really do like that idea of winging it, but building everyday new challenges that can push forward. And when I encounter something that is adverse and I'm feeling woe is me, holy crow, nobody's got it as hard as me, right? Changing that mindset to, now I've got the opportunity to be extraordinary. And the difference between ordinary and extraordinary is often just that little bit extra. So now I'm being given a bit extra. If I push back with a bit extra, I have the opportunity to be extraordinary. And that all forms part of my process. But Chance, you said acceptance. That's something for me. I think I get where you're going with that. Personally, for me, the idea of acceptance of something is a very difficult thing. I'm rather pig-headed in my approach. Perhaps understanding for me would be a better word. Understanding that I am now in a situation of adversity. If I'm just in it and I haven't reached that level of understanding, then I don't have the opportunity to pull myself out of the situation and look at it from a macro perspective. I'm just kind of in it. I'm just struggling to get above water, or I'm just struggling as hard as I can to get out, as opposed to, oh, hold on a second, I'm drowning. Hold on a second, I'm in a difficult place. Great. Let's work my way through this process. That's part of my approach. And then, of course, diet and get out and walk. I can't think myself out of a adverse situation sitting on the couch, but I seem to have a much easier time getting out in the mountains in an environment that feeds my soul and gets my heart and lungs working.
And I'm digging what you're saying, Sean. What do you got? I see you.
I'm reading a book right now. It's about John Boyd, and it's science, war, strategy based. And every morning I'm taking a photo of various pages and highlighting them and putting them up in my Instagram stories. So this morning I put up some more stories, and it just so happens I'm looking at a page right now, actually on my Instagram stories on another screen. And I'm just going to read a couple of sentences. Knowing is action-oriented and a process. Read that again. Knowing is action-oriented and a process. Now, it refers to another author. Polanyi regards the process of knowing as fragmentary clues, senso-motoric or from memory, which are integrated under categories. We make sense of reality by categorizing it. This is the lower level of awareness. It observes separate clues. However, this process of logical disintegration has reduced a comprehensive entity to its relatively meaningless fragments. The higher form of awareness recreates the comprehensive entity of which the disparate clues are a part, and emphasizes that the higher principles which characterize cannot be defined in terms of the law, etc., etc. All of this to say, I started off with knowing is action-oriented and a process. I find it ironic that academics can write books about a process that talks about action is the tool that you gain clarity with, yet they don't execute enough action out in the real world to fully explore their own academic theory. Now, people like John Boyd are anomalies. Boyd, of course, coming from a fighter pilot background, long military background, steeped in action, understood that action creates knowledge. You have to reflect on that knowledge and then turn it into something novel to provide to the world. But you're not providing novel information as an academic if all you are doing is regurgitating lower level awareness information that isn't based on testing it in the real world. It therefore is academic theory, not practical application to test a theory. And those things are radically different. And it is one of my pet peeves right now that people are cherry picking information from books, compiling them into their own book from behind a desk, and they've barely seen sunlight in the last 12 years. So they haven't faced enough action to test their academic theory to understand if it works in a real world. And that is what a lot of John Boyd's central theme was, that academics were creating strategy from behind a desk, but they didn't understand the smell of cordite. They'd never been around explosives, but they were creating theories about how to work with explosives as part of the grand experiment. And so, to me again, knowing is action-oriented and a process. If you're not doing enough, you're not learning the lessons enough, and therefore you're creating almost a false shell of reality.
I got this image in my head of, the difference between theoretical physics versus applied physics. When you have people that are sitting in front of a chalkboard, or people who are sitting in front of a whiteboard, and they're doing all the equations and say, yep, it makes sense in the math. The math makes sense. Excellent. And it's a check mark for a lot of people because they see that as the work. Whereas somebody that is actually doing the scientific method and working through the process and doing the experiments to test whether or not that works or not, is a key proponent of it. And I think it's kind of interesting because I have this question that plays, at least in my mind, directly into what you're saying. And it was, how can people build a mindset that embraces challenges as opportunities for growth? And I think that what you're trying to get at, Sean, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is that if you can't see that, you can't see the difference between theory and actuality, then you're missing a large portion of what it means to do anything. That sound about right?
Well, I know some people who talk a good talk in their basement about how rad they used to be and how much they understand adversity, but they'd never put a rucksack on in all that time. And they'd forgotten what adversity was. They were talking about adversity through a theoretical understanding now of who they are and what it meant then versus what it means now. And so I always encourage people with the same thing. Bro, I'm not interested in hearing how hard you used to be. Go out and do something hard today, and then we'll talk about it. Let's figure out if you understand adversity right now. Because you think about it a lot. You talk about it a lot. But you haven't shown me a lot. So go do something hard, then come talk to me. And so that is often the way. A lot of people live in a theoretical adversity world from back in the day and talk about a good talk, but it is not based in reality. It is literally theoretical versus applied.
That's a great point. Seb, you got any thoughts on any of that?
Yes, the complete opposite. No. No, I get to exactly what Sean, but Sean and I are different that way, and we know it. We always have these conversations, and it always makes them fun. But one of the things for me is I think we have to be very careful not to discount other people's actionable items, right? And so, for example, if you're an academic in psychology or anything, and I literally didn't mean it to pick this specifically, but I think it's such a great example. Yes, you can go out and engage and do all of the things, but you can have the theoretical knowledge and think you know it all. But once you've been following and helping and working through 1,000 different problems with 1,000 different people, and we're able to establish what works and what doesn't in the context of your theoretical knowledge, you've now actioned your theory, right? In my mind. And so I don't see it as the person that necessarily has to be engaged physically. And I don't think that's what Sean means anyways, but the person doesn't necessarily need to be engaged, because what are we just doing here? We're essentially downplaying everybody who's ever done anything that isn't, physical labor. And you can't do that, right? It just doesn't work. And so, but I agree that there is a ton of theoretical knowledge being tossed out there and not a lot of actionable items to back it up. But if you have the right balance and you understand that you need in your field, whatever representation of actionable item needs to be taken for you to build that expertise, I'm in. But you better be a serious, you better engage very seriously in that. Yeah, that's my point on that.
I like it. Trev, what do you got?
Well, back the way that I took the quote there that Sean had is essentially that our reality is in our perception. So the reality that happens around me is in how I perceive what's happening to me. And if I'm able to, when I said I'm not good at accepting things because I feel like I can create my own reality. If something is happening, I'm not going to accept that as a bad thing. I might accept it as a good thing. I'll be aware of that thing that's happening, and how do I leapfrog off of that into somewhere that's going to be beneficial for me. I don't like to look at all the different possibilities that things can be adverse and dwell on them. I want to be aware of them, but like the skier going down the mountain, I'm going to look for the gaps. I'm not going to look at those trees. I'm aware they're here, but I'm very focused on where I'd like to be able to get to in order to in order to navigate my life into a place that's going to be, I think, worthwhile for myself and for my family. The reframing of that adversity for me allows that perception of my reality to change. If something is really difficult for me and I'm going through it and I can say, holy crow, this sure is hard. I'd be great just to give up. But I can look at how my example is being adopted by my children or by my wife, or how my suffering can be of service to somebody else outside. That little shift can give me what I need in order to be able to push through. So our reality is in our perception. And, when we talk about the academics, I think we can't discount the academics. We can't discount people who have different ways of looking at it. Maybe there's going to be something in there that really, really works for us in the future. My learning style is such that if someone says the stove is hot, true story, I have to touch the stove to know how hot, like how long can I keep my hand on there before it's actually burned. I need to have that level of, I need to have that litmus, or I need to have something I can judge against, essentially. And then I can start working backwards and say, oh, the academic says this, and I can pull that out. But before I'm actually in it and I do it, I don't have much of a bearing. I'm not one of these smart people that can learn from other people's mistakes. And Hick's law, you've probably heard of that one, which states that the more options that we have to deal with something, quite often our reaction time will slow down, because we're like, well, should I do this one or should I do that one? Sometimes it's really beneficial just to stick your head down and be pig-headed and use what you know to work, get through whatever is tormenting you or what the adversity in the moment, and then you can look back and say, was there a better way? And that's like Seb was saying before, during, and after. I think it's hugely critical to self-growth to be able to have a retrospective at the end.
Could not agree more with that. And I have a specific question for you on this, in that if someone says the stove is hot, versus someone says the stove is 115 degrees, would that change your concept of the moment.
No,
Would you still have to touch it?
No, because I want to know what 115 degrees feels like, and I've done it. Oxyacetylene torch. Like, can I put my hand through it really quick? Yeah, you can actually. It's not that bad. How much until it actually burns? Okay, that's a bit too much, right? But now I know, and I feel it's like I'll go back to learning to drive. Tell my daughter, okay, got it. We're in a safe area. We're going to go faster, Now slam on the brakes, okay? Feel the ABS kick in. See the limitations. Okay, we're going to gun it, and we're going to take a corner really, really fast, right? Feel the wheels start slipping out. We need to know where our boundaries are, and so we can learn where we can play within, and we can learn how we can extend those boundaries and push a little bit. What was it Browning said? A man's reach should exceed his grasp, less what's a heaven for? We need to be able to explore those to grow. And if we're too afraid to move between those, the second we start getting close to those boundaries, and maybe we're not even close to them, we're going to be feeling that adversity. And I think that's where the daily challenges, the daily reframing will help an individual deal with real adversity when it does hit.
I like this. Sean, you got any thoughts on that?
I do. So I'm going to combine Seb and Travis's thoughts, and I know this is not their totality of their thoughts. This is just some things that I picked up from both fellas and then combined in my mind into this statement. So, as I stated, knowing is through action. That's called experience. And how you learn things is through doing and then forming patterns, just as Travis said. And so I'm the same way. If someone says that stove is too hot, don't touch it, I'm going to freaking touch it, man, because I want to know what that's all about, because I like forming patterns in my world. And I mean, I've got a finger here that is shaped like a shield. It's the only fingernail I've got that's shaped like a shield. All the other ones are normal shapes. And that's because when I was young, I was watching my mom iron in England, and I was hanging on to and she said, take your hands off there. It's really hot around here. You got to be careful. And you know what? I put my hands back up there, and it's never been the same. It has never, ever been the same. So every time I look at that finger, I can think, yeah, I like pushing the envelope, man. I like testing the environment. I like seeing how hot is hot. I like understanding don't do it. I like understanding the full left and right of arc. And so does it get you in trouble? Yeah, for sure it does. Yeah, I've got a scarred hand from it, just like all of us have got scars. But here's the important difference. The scars you pick up in life are moments where you either get to learn in the moment or not. And so for anyone out there who talks about all the scars they've accumulated, if you're no wiser from it, well, you're the dumbest scarred up person out there. You've got to learn from the moment. You've got to learn from the finger. You've got to learn from all of the mistakes. And that is through patterns. I now know not to have my fingers around red hot irons. That was learned a long time ago. And that is the way of it. Knowing is through action. So with Travis talking about, hanging out in his office right now and thinking about things, and I'm paraphrasing a lot, and Seb talking about, academics have their place, and someone who is a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist who sees 1,000 patients, even though they're existing in the academic world, is that action? I believe it is, because they're interacting with another human. They're engaging in their work outside of the walls of their own office, outside of their cubicle. So if Travis never leaves his room right now that he's in and hermits away for the next 10 years reading the internet, by the time he gets to the end of it, his sense of reality is not the same reality as the larger world around him through the door in his office. And so that's what we're supposed to do. That is actually what our reality is us interacting through action with the external world outside of our consciousness, outside of our brain, outside of our who we are, inside what we think we are. And so the only way to understand this human is to interact with the bigger world around us. And that is Knowing is action. And so if someone is out there thinking about how to learn in the moment through adversity, reading stories about adverse scenarios is not knowing. It is just reading. You can glean whatever messages you want or lessons you want from someone else's life that you're reading about or someone else's theory in an academic paper. You can glean whatever you glean. You can patternize it all day long on a theoretical basis. But the rubber has to hit the road in order to test the theory to see if your non-reality or reality is in the right place.
It's a good point. I'm going to use this little thing that clicked in my head as you were talking, Sean, is that there's two types of scars. You got smart scars and you got dumb scars. Smart scars are the ones you learn from. Dumb scars are the ones you get twice. I think I might teach that to my kids. That's going to be a lot of fun. I'm wondering, though, you know, we're talking about taking action, right? And for some, taking action it's a large step. Perhaps they've never taken action before. Maybe they've spent their entire. There's lots of people. My wife works in university. There's lots of people that have gone through school, then went to university, then went to graduate school, then got their PhD, and now they teach. And they've never lived a life. They just have learned in school their whole life. That's been their action. But how do we teach people? How do we get others to see the benefits of failing, of getting smart scars? How do we get others to see that that is a beneficial sequence of events? Because from the outside, when you see someone make a mistake, you know, they're riding their bike and they're not paying attention and they hit a tree on the path and they go flying off their handlebars and they're like, wow, that looked dumb. Are they gaining from that? Are they not? How do we teach people to want to be the one flying off the handlebars rather than the one standing on the side of the road? If that makes sense. Trav, I'm going to come to you. What do you think?
Example. I think it's the only thing you can do is just lead by example. Live your life in a certain way so that others who are ready to want to live in a similar way to that will either approach you or just learn from your example. I don't think it's our job to teach everybody else by knocking on doors with an awake and a watchtower or whatever it might be. If people aren't ready to hear the good word, what was that saying that yesterday the Chief Firearms Officer of Alberta did a podcast with her, and she's a professor, and she had this sign up. It was an education compelled or knowledge compelled is not knowledge retained. There's nothing that we can do to compel somebody else to learn something, but we can live our lives in a certain way, and when people who want to do the same thing are ready, they will learn from it or reach out. I think that's all we can really do.
Love it. Seb, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Travis. We're not going to go around and try to convince people against their will. If they're coming to us, then we'll have that conversation. Or if they just so happen to be listening to this and we're having a conversation, a sensible conversation that they can gain from, and they're in that state of mind, by all means, go for it. But I mean, let's take something very simple that almost everybody can relate to: parenting. Okay, so go ahead and tell anybody, before you had kids, how did you view parenting? How did you anticipate parenting was going to go? How did you anticipate you were going to partake in parenting? What kind of advice you got from people that already had kids? And what are some of those, what sort of emotional reactions or reactions you've given in relation to those advice? And how did it feel once the rubber hit the road? So we can talk all day about no iPads and no this and no that. Just wait till you're 69 hours with no sleep. I want to see you uphold your moral standards. And maybe you will, and who knows, right? But, and so I think that it's to live in denial of the fact that wheels to the pavement is a must in relation to your academic knowledge is, I will simply say this: if you don't think that that's the case, you're not nearly as smart as you think you are. It's that simple. And engage in something that challenges the knowledge that you have and see if everything lines up. When I was at the police academy, we were learning this and that and this and that. I was shocked the first time that somebody didn't listen to me. No, I wasn't, because I anticipated that was going to be the case. But according to the way the book teaches it and how I'm supposed to be, sort of negotiating certain things, well, there is a way. There is a better way to do it. But that way literally never works, never does. So when you hit the road, you realize, I would love to apply this technique or this verbal judo or this way of negotiating with people, but it just simply doesn't work in most instances. So you have to have a plan B and a plan C and a plan D, right? Anyways, I digress. I mean, if somebody is truly questioning whether or not they can benefit from this, it is absolutely undeniable that you will. So if you've been in the academic realm forever, go out and do stuff. If you've never been in the academic world, so let's flip the script now. Because you have a lot of people going around thinking that academia is completely disconnected from knowledge and that it's all a big scam and it's all, whatever the case may be. And there are things that are definitely, on the more sketchy side, but really there is a ton of value coming from academia if you do it correctly and if you combine it with real life experience. And so, I'll kind of leave it at that. Yeah.
I like it. The funny part is that there's sketchiness everywhere. Doesn't matter what group you're in, doesn't matter where you work, doesn't matter who you talk to, there's sketchy people and there's sketchy things that happen. And, that's just the way life is. And I think it's part of our managing adversity is managing other people's sketchiness or their lack of understanding or their just difference of understanding than ours rather than lack of, I think. Sean, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I'll build off of that because it's not just other people. It's us. It's you. It's me. It's everyone. I mean, you don't know what sketchy is until you look at yourself. The biggest, sketchiest person in the room is me until I figure me out and remove the sketchiness. And what does sketchiness mean? I mean, it's a big word with all kinds of meanings, but it could be simplified down to you're not doing a very good job, dude. And so if that's the case, people are pretty prone to pointing a finger at some other dude or some other person. They're kind of sketchy, huh? They don't really know what's up. They've never left their basement. They're super sketch. Well, you can be running around in the sunshine, Mr. Action Man. And if you're running around thinking that because you're action-oriented, you're not sketchy, that is not true. There's people who are not good people who are running around in the sunshine thinking that they're good people, but they haven't contextualized themselves deeply enough. They don't understand themselves deeply enough to realize that actually they're the biggest goof on the block, even though they're running around action-oriented. And so I feel that who you surround yourself with is really the biggest indicator of how much work you're doing. And by surround yourself with, I don't mean create a entourage that you barely engage with, that provides you lots of shine through association of names rather than association of action on yourself. So if I'm running with a strong crew, I don't want to disappoint that crew, man. I want to hold up my end. And I'm not just talking about running at the front of the pack and looking over my shoulder and laughing at people, teasing them, mocking them, poking them, prodding them. I'm talking about I best be doing that to myself. So it is easy to externalize, but I think most of the finger pointing should be done at the internal.
I 100% agree with that. Thank you for the clarification, because it is I think it's a key proponent in any sort of adverse situation. You have to look at yourself to begin with. If you're looking at the external adverse situations in terms of other things happening to us, I think we have been speaking very much about the physical side of adversity in terms of, doing something hard. At least in my mind, it's the connotation of physicality. Going out on a ruck march, going to do jiu-jitsu, going to do things physically hard. But sitting quietly with yourself can be equally, if not more, hard than being able to go for a long run. And a lot of people use those physical outlets as an escape rather than the tools that they're meant to be. Any thoughts on that? Travis, I'm going to hit you. What do you think?
Yeah, a few things brought up. I agree. Show me your friends, I'll show you who you are. I agree with that. You birds of a feather tend to flock together. Talking about the external, if you're always looking at the external environment and what's happening to you, you've just found yourself smack dab in victim mentality. And that's where my level of acceptance I have a hard time with. Accepting a situation to me means I'm not taking control of how I'm going to be able to move forward. Looking at the internal, what can I always come back to that quote from Viktor Frankl, but in a nutshell, it's up to us how we perceive things. The one thing you can't take from me is how I choose to respond to what you do to me. The last of life's great freedoms is one's ability to choose their own attitude in any given circumstance. And really that's true for everything, for our reality, for adversity. It's how we respond to it that we can affect, and that's it. Seb asked about our children, people giving advice on how to raise children, and I didn't listen to anybody. I knew that I didn't want to repeat the mistakes that were, I looked at as mistakes, and I wanted to, things that I thought were good, I'd try and repeat that. When I was a kid, I had my voice beaten out of me. I wanted my kids to be able to have a voice. I could understand that everyone's going to be different, so I'd have to approach the adversity of parenting and working with a child as a very individual affair. And I think that analogy of working with each child is going to be, everyone's going to learn different and adapt differently, is the same way that we approach our own problems and challenges. Not every challenge is going to be cookie cutter and the same approach is going to work for it, but it's just like not every drive is going to be the same, but if we apply the protocol and principles that we've been practicing, it becomes subconscious. Yes, adversity can be physical, and I think that's probably one of the easiest ways for us to encounter adversity and titrate it, to allow us to put enough adversity, but I haven't injured myself. Just enough adversity, but I'm going to be able to get back up again. Adversity can be mental as well. It can be emotional, dealing with the loss of a loved one, dealing with a breakdown of a relationship. It can be finding yourself in a situation that you don't have anything that you can physically fight back against. And personally, I think that can be the hardest adversity for people. For myself, I'm 6'6", 250, 60 pounds. If I can fight back against my adversity, give it to me any day. I'll take those odds, right? But the second I'm faced with adversity that I have to reason my way through, that I have to square myself with emotionally, and I can't just physically attack it, it takes a very, very different mindset and approach for me to be able to deal with that. And I've learned over the years, and I'm still learning, and I'm learning from great people like yourselves on how to deal with those sort of things. But the mental adversity can be just like mental health, the invisible one. People can look and say, oh, that person's fine. They're not struggling. They're not dealing with anything. Those can be the toughest challenges.
100%. Seb, got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's easy to go towards the physicality. I think one of the reasons why we're doing that is it encompasses all the other aspects. You know, if you push yourself hard enough physically, everything else gets taxed. That includes the emotional, the mental, and all of the subsystems. So what you are doing, if we're sort of reverse engineering adversity, if you're self-imposing it, doing it in a physical way is a guaranteed way to hit almost all of the modalities. right? So it's a good way to create artificial stress, and that's the reason why it's used so extensively. But I think that it doesn't change the fact that some people use it as an escape. And if you are using it as an escape, you need to have the level of introspection required to realize that you are taking a back door, because you do not want to face head on or even flank what it is that's causing the real issues. And that's a big problem. And so one of the ways to fix this is this: curiosity and engagement. Like, you need to be extremely curious of what the relationship is between modalities of your wellness. If you don't know, you ought to know. Like, how are you supposed to address something that you don't know anything about? You can't, right? So you need a certain amount of technical knowledge. And in order to do that, you're going to have to invest in you. And that's taking the time to realize what mental and emotional distress can come from being out of shape, for example, or what kind of mental and emotional distress can, or physical distress can come, psychosomatically from having, emotional stresses going on. And so once you start understanding the relationship between those things, and you start realizing that they are consistently interconnected and not separated, you can address things differently with more balanced. You want to be more balanced in your approach. And so you're able to look at yourself and say, okay, I'm on my 8th tough workout this week, but I haven't read a book yet. Like, it's pretty telling that you're very comfortable and favor a certain type of modality to challenge yourself. And that's okay. It's good to recognize that, but it's important to be multifaceted, because if I take from you your ability to train, i.e., you're losing a leg right now, and you're going to be 6 months to a year before you're half the person you used to be from a physical standpoint. That's going to be a really hard pill to swallow if you put all your eggs in the same basket. And so it's important to have that multi-layered approach to your personality, so that if anything is taken away from you, nothing is taken away from you.
Bam. Now Seb needs a little mic toss thing going on to get those mic drops. Seb, you before I come to you, Sean, there's this example that popped into my head as you were talking, Seb. You guys remember the show MASH from back in the day? And not the movie, but the TV show. And there was a point in time where one of the soldiers came into the MASH, and his hands were all messed up, and one of the docs had to replace some nerves, but they were like, whatever, his hands are fine, but he needs to keep his legs, so they're going to take some of the nerves out of his hand and put them in his legs. And the guy wakes up in recovery, and the doctor's all happy about it, like, hey man, I saved your leg, and you're gonna be able to walk it's gonna be awesome. And he's looking at his hands, they're shaking like mad, and he can't use them properly. And the patient is like, my hands are my life. What, I can't do anything now. That he was a concert pianist. And there was the whole drama thing of the show itself that it's brought out, but it's Winchester, that's who it was. Was the character that the doc that came out, and afterwards, and he's like, here's a set of music for just for the left hand, which was the one that he could use. And so there's absolutely moments in time where if that's your only skill set, or that's your only adversity, or that's the only way you know how to deal with certain things, if that gets taken away from you, it can be very jarring, but there's still a way through it. Sean, any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, so I'll stick with the cognitive processing aspect of things rather than the physicality of things. And so when it comes to cognitive, I think I'd just like to make 2 points. One is the obvious one, and that is a narrative development. So you developing a story within your mind, within your existence, within the present moment, of how you're going to deal with that concert pianist problem. And so the narrative that you tell yourself is what will define yourself in the immediate future. And so if you haven't done a whole lot of narrative development, it probably means that you haven't faced a whole lot of adversity. Because when you face adversity, what I typically have to do is spin up a little tale in my head on how I'm going to move through this, or what's the benefit of this, or what's the downside to this, or hope I learn from this. And you're telling yourself stories as you're moving through these moments in the real time. When things are really hot and heavy, or things are just chaotic as you're facing adversity, maybe, depending on what phase of life you're in, if you're a young person, a lot of your time will be spent just absorbing all of that and trying to make sense of the chaos of the moment, whether it's intellectual or physical. And so what you have to learn to do is game theory, which we talked about in a recent podcast with all the tier 1 operators. And that was game theory is math. And what we are all learning in life is how to do math and offload it into our unconscious state. So to Travis's point, someone can learn how to drive a car. We're just doing game theory. Now, the best operators that I have seen in the past are people who can do game theory really fast and really tight. And it doesn't mean that they know they're doing game theory. In fact, it's often the case that they haven't heard of game theory, but they've been learning how to do game theory since the get-go. And that is because when you step into a team room, it is a competitive environment where you observe your actions against someone else's actions and contextualize them through a pattern of math to understand the game theory of the moment. Rapid game theory people create rapid solutions in real time versus people who aren't familiar with understanding the external world and all of the patterns that exist in it. Now they have to slow things down to do new math, new game theory. That's called learning, experience-based learning. And so the more you've faced, the better you are at facing. And so with game theory being the idea, it is important that as a young person, the adversity of the moment is going to feel different than me in my 60s, based on I've probably faced a little bit more adversity. And that's just over the decades. It's just math. And so I am pretty good at the chaos of the moment versus 20-year-old Sean, who wasn't quite as good. These are all learned throughout the phases of our life. So adversity, intellectual or physical, is a learned process. But how good you get at it is how much you pay attention to it. If you ain't forming patterns, you're just repeating a singular moment over and over and over again because you never saw the pattern to move around the problem or move through the problem or solve the problem. Life is patterns. So the more you can patternize, the more you can game theoryize, the more you can get on with just existing in the moment and saying, whatever, freaking bring it. It's not that I don't care. It's that it doesn't bother me because I've just seen enough of adversity that I can simply accept it rather than freak out about it. But that is me relying on decades of game theory that I don't do consciously. I don't look at a problem in front of me and sit down with a pen and paper and start writing out the algorithm. Because again, it is math. But the algorithm of the moment has, if you've seen it enough, it solves itself. And so what am I suggesting? It's going to be weird. But if you've been around long enough and you've seen enough and you've thought about it enough, the world just unfolds in front of you with way less problems than you can imagine. And so all of the contrived problems, all of the social media problems, all of the problems out there in the world that seem like such a big deal will become less and less of a big deal as you get older and older and play the game more and more intentionally. Because if you ain't playing the game intentionally, all you were doing is repeating the same lesson.
Bam. We're getting mic drops left, right, and center here. Travis?
I
Your thoughts
love
on
it.
any of this?
I love what Sean's saying there. It's really good. And a little Desigrata quote, the universe will unfold as it should. I love it. The idea of the game theory, I should listen to that episode that you guys did. I haven't yet, but it sounds like a good one. There are people who are too afraid to even pick up the controller and play that game. You're not even engaging in it. We talk about adversity and ways to overcome adversity, but the whole process of it is a game, and the game is how do we learn from that adversity so we don't repeat the same adversity? From a Schopenhaueristic sort of pessimistic look at the world and life is adversity. But is it? I mean, really, if we look at it as a game and we're looking at the different levels that are coming up and the different level bosses that we're working through, and we realize that life is adversity and we're able to progress through each one of these things, it's kind of fun. It really is kind of fun when these challenges kind of come up to you. And that whole reframing, I think, is a very, very important part of the whole puzzle here. And it might not feel fun when you're in the thick of it. And maybe that's where the show me your friends and I'll show you who you are. If you're making sure that you hang around with other people who bring you up, who aren't there to bring you down, who are doing things in a way that you'd like to see, when it gets really hard, you can tune into the collective. You can turn to people that are doing things in a way that looks like they have it figured. And you can reframe it so it's going to be a bit more fun. Yeah, that's all I really have to build off what he's saying there, but I agree wholeheartedly, Sean. It is a game, the whole thing is. And once you realize what that game is, it'll change to a new one, because that's just what life does. But you just have to keep adapting. And sometimes the principles that we apply to level 1 will also be applicable to level 2 and level 3.
You're getting into video games, and I'm starting to love this. But
I know you would, yes.
Seb, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I sure do. So when Sean was talking, there was a lot of good stuff coming out there, and it helped me formulate, what engagement looks like to me. What does that even mean? I understand the being in the moment and doing all this stuff, but tell me more, kind of deal. And one of the things that I kind of came up with quickly when I was sitting here is the realization that something is happening, right? The identification of a problem, so to speak, which is, i.e., your adversity. The tapping into the bank of skills, knowledge, and abilities to see what you have for tools to be dealing with this situation. And now you start laying out, based on your skills, knowledge, abilities, and experience, you're able to sort of expose your solution-based, your solutions, essentially, and have options on how you want to deal with this one way or another. It really doesn't matter. If you're more sort of if you're somebody that does it more sort of instinctively, and it's very, you may not, cognitively, you may not know exactly, and that's it's a way to do it. And if it works for you, then it works. It's that simple. We're not going to try to change something that's already working. But if it isn't working, is there something that you're missing? So once you have your options laid out, now you have solutions applied. And now you have your reassessment, as we talked after. So now you fully engage in the process at almost every level, pre, during, and post, and you're able to take this into the next battle, which is my next point. Embrace it. Life will suck at time, all the time. It's never going to stop sucking at time. Like, that's just the way it is. The more you're trying to avoid the pain, and here's an important distinction that I will make. You see me post stoicism things all the time on my Instagram. I really adhere to a lot of those concepts conceptually. And it's not because I ever read a stoicism book. It's because life had taught me to do those things. So they all feel very natural to me. Every time I read a stoic quote, I never go, wait a minute, I've never heard of this before. It's always like, that's how I do it, And so, but the contention with stoicism is that sometimes if you don't do it correctly, it can be more about avoiding the pain than living life to the fullest. And if you're doing that, I will equate this to you trying to control a bipolar disorder where you are given medications that are keeping you flat. So you no longer encounters the highs and lows the way you used to. In fact, you're on a very, very even line, which makes the joy not so joyous and the pain not so painful, right? You're kind of floating. And that's what stoicism can do for you if you're not doing it correctly. If you are trying to avoid the pain in this life, you are not doing it correctly. It's never going to work, and it's going to create anxiety, and it will create all kinds of things. So it's much better to fully embrace it, self-impose it, embrace it. When it hits you, see the challenge in it, understand that it makes you stronger, use the positive reframes to think about what you're going to get out of this and how meaningful it will be in the long run, what kind of experience, skills, knowledge, and abilities it will bring to your life, to your persona, to your kids, to the people around you, and keep engaging in that. And then realize, once you're reassessing, that you survived, that you did exactly what you ought to have been doing under very difficult circumstances, and that you be prepared for the next one. Don't try to think, I just hope it's going to be enough for a while. It's kind of, and it's the same. We see it, man. I swear, every single time it works. You're on a selection course. We go, okay, we're going to run, this last 10 kilometers. And once you hit the 10-kilometer mark, you just keep going. And half of those people quit. You know why? Because they put an end mark in their mind. You never do that. That's a rookie mistake. I never once believed anything anybody said. When we stop running, we stop running, kind of deal. And it's exactly the same with adversity. If you put an endpoint to adversity, everything is worse. Everything is exacerbated. There isn't an endpoint. It will always get worse in one way or another, but you will get stronger and more capable of dealing with it. So that's going to also increase, provided that you engage in it fully.
Man, this is a hot recording. I'm loving this already. Sean, what do you got?
Well, Seb, I'm glad you said what you said in respect to stoicism, because it's something that's been bubbling up in me for a couple of weeks, and it's only now that I feel comfortable enough to verbalize it externally. And I've been observing some people on social media predominantly that talk about being stoic. And to say that they don't understand stoicism is probably too strong of a statement. But they're trying to understand stoicism, and they maybe don't understand it the way that they could understand it. And so it has become a crutch. And so it's not a new thought for me, and it's not only seen it one time kind of thing for me. But you saying what you've said, Seb, has kind of made me bite down on it a little bit and just simply state that I feel that the modern version of stoicism is currently, to some degree, being used as a crutch by a number of people, not everyone. And so what does that mean? I think that when it's like the phases of life, you get introduced to stoicism, and it's a big deal because there's a lot of good stuff in there. Go read Marcus Aurelius, go read Meditations, there's lots of good stuff when it comes to stoicism. But once it becomes your religion and it becomes your crutch, then it isn't a healthy tool. And so we all have a pile of tools in front of our noses, but we've also got a pile of tools within us. And I feel that the information age has got people desperately seeking for the latest, greatest crutch, whatever pops up this year versus what'll pop up 5 years from now. Latch onto that crutch and just keep hobbling along as best as they can without ever just sitting down, throwing away all the crutches and thinking about what kind of language they've got within themselves, what kind of religion they've got within themselves. Do they have their own version of stoicism within themselves that they've never ever thought about? Do they have a thought construct, a philosophical construct, a way of life construct within them that if they did a little bit of digging, maybe it would become novel, a new construct on how to live their life? And better yet, through that process, start exemplifying it without talking about it. Just action. A new way of thinking for you, but not you talking about how new it is. Just going out and testing your theory through action and doing it long enough that maybe some people will start to pay attention. And they might not ask you to write a book. They might not ask you to write or design a new program that they can pay $100 a month for. What they just might do is from afar observe to see if it's going well for you. And if it is, they might hit you up with a question or two like, hey man, what's your process? Like Trav said, what are our processes? And our processes aren't so different or earth-shatteringly new that people are going to consider lining up at Travis's door or Seb's door or my door or Chance's door to ask even more questions, because we're not that different. We're not that novel. But I'm novel enough to challenge everyone to start thinking about how novel they are. How novel is your internal thought? Because I find that a lot of people are the same.
I think I think you and I have had this conversation before, Sean. We've talked about it on a number of occasions. But you're right. I think Stoicism, I think, interestingly enough, most theological thought constructs are very similar in teachings. Let me put it that way. Maybe not the words or the verbiage they use or how they get that across, but, you know, be a good person. You know, seek hardships so that others don't have to. Things like that are pretty common across any theological, most theological things that I can think of. I looked up the etymology of adversity as we were talking, and the etymology comes from adversus in Latin, which means opposition or turned against. And I think this is a great point because I believe for myself, I looked at adversity as difficulty, was things that were challenging or outside of my thought construct in the moment. But in reality, what I've realized is that, at least for myself again, adversity is going against my whatever thought I had. So did I think I was capable of doing the Nijmegen March when I started? Not really. Well, and then I have to go against that thought, test it out. That means I got to go physically walk it. I can't think about it anymore at this point. You know, when I first started jiu-jitsu, I thought I was physically capable in a grappling match. I wasn't, right? But I still had to go against the thought itself in order to engage it, to make it adversity, at least in my mind. What do you guys think on this? Travis, I'm going to come back to you. What do you think?
Madly taking notes. Everyone's talking. Amazing points out here. I really like this conversation. To Seb's point, conflict avoided is conflict amplified. If we avoid it, it will rear its ugly head, larger, amplified. The faster we're able to meet that conflict head on, the better off we are. A couple analogies I use in my own head, just little psychological things. Maybe they work for me. Maybe they'll work for somebody else. I know they work for me. Maybe they'll work for somebody else. If the ship is taking on water, the ship is sinking, and I've just got a little cup to bail water out with, bail faster. There's always going to be the way to get it out, and I just go in my head, just bail faster. Keep bailing, bail faster. You don't give up. There's always a way to get through this. Bail faster until another opportunity presents or another way to get that ship going comes through. The other one is in physical adversity. If I'm in something where I am absolutely exhausted and I feel like I can't push myself any longer, or I'm in a situation where, let's say I'm climbing and it's run out and there's a lot of exposure, a mantra in my head, real short and real simple. I can. I just keep saying it over in my head until I get through it. I do believe, that it's funny you guys talk about the Stoicism thing. I've never posted a Stoic quote up. I've read through some Stoic books and I like it, but there is a part of me that it feels like P90X or 7-minute abs or CrossFit or these quick solutions to larger issues. And there's nothing wrong with P90X or CrossFit or Stoicism or any of these things, but there is no quick solution. any one of these things can help get you going, exercise your body, exercise your mind, exercise your emotions, but we have to keep at it. And in a day and age when people are so used to getting instant gratification, understanding that time is your greatest ally when it comes to emotional development, getting over something, dealing with adversity, physical, getting stronger, that these things don't come overnight, and we can just keep stacking small habits day by day. It gets better. I've got an example. It might be a little long into the podcast here. I can bring it up afterwards, but I think life is supposed to be difficult. We're supposed to be presented with these challenges physically, emotionally, psychologically as we progress through life, and we progress to be a better person step by step. And if we look at that as, all right, fantastic, I'm getting on to the next level now. I've learned enough from this one, I can go forward, and we can embrace whatever that adversity that we're feeling now, either as something that will help us be better or help things be better for others around us, however we want to reframe it, and realize that this is a time game. There's really not too much that we can't get through.
Bam. Love it. Seb, what do you got?
What do you call a friend or someone that pushes you, challenges you, and leaves you elevated? You call that a good, you call that a good friend, essentially, right? But what do we refer to when we talk about adversity? And it does exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, it's like not only the reframing, but your initial frame is wrong. Fundamentally, why do you see adversity as this big dark cloud? It's meant to elevate you. If you see it that way, you start, ahead of the game. Now, let's bring another very sensitive friend in the picture: death. And if you look culturally at the various cultures around the world, what we see as the dark grim reaper and all of the tools with the freaking, I don't even know what that thing is called, where you cut the hay with, and yeah, exactly that thing. It's so, can it be built to be more like adversarial, or can it be built to be more negative or dark or freaking like ominous, kind of deal? And it's like, why are we doing that? I mean, you remember the memes with the guys from Ghana that were consistently dancing when people die and carrying the coffin? I mean, there were so many good jokes coming out of that, but the reality is that's how they view death. It's a gift, And so these guys are not walking around scared shitless of dying all the time, right? They're not walking around on eggshell. Why? Because they don't see it as this big dark cloud that we do in part of the Western world. And I would say, why is that? Well, there's a few reasons, but one of those is we really like our comfort, and that's not necessarily helping us. But I mean, there's obviously all kinds of underlying reasons, movies being one of them, and there's just the glamour, like the way it's built and the way it's built up and the way it's made to be this big dark force, but it really isn't. It's a very natural process that's a part of life, and it's not the end of it. It's a part of life, And so once you start understanding that, and you start having to face it on the regular based upon some of the things that you're engaging in, and realizing that you need to be able to live up to the fact that this could happen any day. And now you start reframing that. What does that look like? Well, there's many before me that have stepped up for the collective that are faced the same odds. And so you start building up this resilience towards death, for example. And if you think about it, most things are sort of a lesser version of death. I mean, it creates these survival mechanisms in us, and we try to avoid it at all costs, including comfort or discomfort, rather. And so the point I was making here is two things. Adversity is in the enemy. Death is in the enemy. How you view it is going to be the enemy. That's what's going to create issues for you. So if you've never stopped to think about how do you view adversity when it enters your life, and how do you view the prospect of eventually having this coming to an end, or the concept of loss, or whatever the case may be in which death is demonstrated, you ought to do that. as well. That has to happen. Like, you need to make peace with those. And once you make peace with those, you will realize that a lot of the things that you are afraid of, and a lot of the things that you're refusing to engage in, or a lot of the things that you're apprehensive about, are about the fundamental views that you have on the whole concept of adversity itself.
Yeah, I got so many thoughts, but Sean, we're hitting you first. What do you got?
Sounds good. So something that Seb said there about, well, I'm not going to reiterate it all because it was too good. I'll try to build off it if that's possible. And it comes down to how you started this off, Chance, with adversity, generally speaking, the etymology being the opposite of what you want to do, the opposite of, if I can paraphrase. Is that correct?
It was the opposition, or something being turned against something being turned around.
Fair enough. So what I was thinking is, you can tell yourself, as you did, Chance, that okay, I'm going to start jujitsu. That's adverse. That's adversity. That is not really what I want to do. Or maybe you thought that is what you wanted to do. But within about 3 classes, you probably realized that you weren't the world's greatest grappler, and that maybe this was going to be really hard. And at some point, probably within those first few sessions, you probably told yourself, man, I don't want any of this, to some degree. But that is called facing the adversity of the moment. However, that isn't a one and done. This isn't for Chance. This isn't for anyone on the panel. This is just a general statement. You can't start BJJ and tell yourself, now you're Mr. Adversity. Because eventually you normalize the abnormal. Now you own 12 gis. Now you've been to 100 sessions. Or maybe you own 12 gis and you've only been to 6 sessions. But either way, you're starting to normalize the process. The moment that you normalize the process, it's time to make it abnormal again. That is called adversity. And so you can sign on any dotted line you want. For any sport, for any career, for any life trajectory, you sign on the dotted line. Eventually, if you face it with enough intensity, you'll start to normalize the abnormal. Now, it isn't adverse anymore. Our job is to stay involved in the game, but to always dial up the heat on the stove. We have to. You've always got to dial up the rotary dial. It just has to be done. Because the moment you start settling into BJJ is the moment that you're not facing adversity, is the moment that you've become complacent, is the moment that you've got okay with mediocrity, is the moment that you now can't spell adverse. Because you think you're in the adversity, because that's what you told yourself on day 1. But you haven't revisited that on day 1000. And this isn't, again, directed at anyone. This is directed at me, I suppose. No matter how hard you think you are, no matter how fast you think you go, no matter how big you think, you can always do all of those more. And the only way to do more is to face more. And I'm not talking more luxury, more comfort. I'm talking the opposite of, which is do the things you don't necessarily want to do. And that is the gold, as we all know. That is where the wisdom comes from, is facing the abnormal and making it normal and learning the lessons in it. I've stated in several podcasts about, on my Army sniper course, I got to a point where I thought I was going to wash out of the program, or I thought I was going to fail so bad that they were going to send me home the next day. I packed my bags the night before because I thought I was going on the bus. And so we were all failing all kinds of things. Up until that point in my military career, I'd never failed that much, ever. But this course was hard. And it was hard for young Sean because I had to learn how to deal with failure in the real time without anyone putting their arm around my shoulder that I could cry on. Because back in the day, it was all on you. You sank or swim based on who you were in the moment. And you had to have some faith in yourself. You had to believe that you could make it through it. But along the way, I started to learn enough from the failures that I started liking the taste of it. And so ever since that course, I have pursued failure like it's my friend. And so I've played the reverse Uno card on adversity. I love it, man. Because that's where I learn the most. To me, life is boring unless my hand is on fire, unless I'm learning something new, unless someone's telling me, don't do that. I know that I'm on the right track when I'm kind of screwing up to some degree, or failing to some degree, or bummed to some degree. As y'all know, I was bummed about podcasting back in the day. Couldn't stand it. It was driving me crazy. I just wanted to quit it. But now I've just turned it into my game. It's a game. It's adverse. I don't like public speaking. I love public speaking, is what I lie to myself about. You just got to lie to yourself sometimes. And I don't mean lie as in delusional. Before I jumped into this podcast, I was like, oh man, I freaking love podcasting. I didn't yell it into a mirror, but here's what is interesting to me. As much as I sometimes struggle with public speaking, if I'm there with friends, if I'm there with bro-hemages like today, it is so much more easy. And why is that? Because, well, I love on you guys because you're awesome, but I know that I'm in the right company because you've all faced enough adversity that I feel good about the crew that I hang out with in the show today. So if you're in the suck right now, whoever you are that's listening to this later, and you don't know how to bust out of that, you got to like identify a tight crew who kicks fucking ass. And I don't mean reading about it and talking about it. I'm talking about doing it. I'm talking about asses to the stratosphere kicked. You got to go find people who are freaks who will reframe your idea of what adversity is so that you'll understand anything is possible if you saddle up next to the right team and frickin' get after it.
Man, so many mic drops. Don't even know where to go with this. This is fantastic. Trav, you got all kinds of notes.
Why do I have to follow these two?
What do you
got nothing. I got nothing but just to say, love you guys. It's amazing information that you're sharing. Seb, talking about death there. Yes, that's the only thing that gives life value is death. If I gave you a bucket and filled it with 20 pounds of gold, you'd probably be pretty happy. If I gave you a bucket and filled it with 20 pounds of ocean water, you'd probably dump the thing out and say, what are you doing? Well, there's lots of ocean water out there. There's not a lot of gold. And life is scarce. There's only so many days that we have. If every day we're able to take a little bit of that gold and put it in the bucket, when we're done and we're gone, others can look at this bucket and say, holy crow, look what this person has left for us. I think a lot of people are afraid to even pick up those pieces and stick it in their bucket, lest they lose it, lest something happens, and they'll get to the end of the run and look in this empty bucket. Yes, adversity is something, failure is something that should be normalized. People should seek out failure on a constant basis because it's only through failure that growth happens. That's where our learning happens. I know for me, the only way I can learn is I have to fail. I'm just not smart enough to learn from other people's mistakes and learn from where they go through. I actually have to viscerally live it, taste it, touch it in order to really have those boundaries of where it's at. It can make for some great high times. It can make for some really low times. But just like being out in the mountains and it's raining and windy and snowing and sleeting and I just want to call it quits and pack it up, I know that if I'm able to hunker down and get through that night, I'm probably going to be looking at bluebird skies the next day. And when, Sean, you're talking about, that adversity that you feel, you got into jiu-jitsu. I know people, they tell me, I've got 10 years experience at whatever it might be. I've got 20 years experience at whatever it is. Do they? Do you actually have 10 years experience in that field, or do you have half a year of experience 20 times over? And I think that's a good question that people should ask themselves. Am I just doing what I've done yesterday? Because if I keep doing what I've always done, I'll always get what I've always got.
You had there's an example that popped in my head while you were talking, Travis, and it's, when you're on the road and you see that 17, 18-year-old dude who's just ripping down the straightaway in his brand new car that is wherever he got it from, doesn't matter, but they in those moments people think that they're great drivers, right? I'm a great driver, and they've never had to experience what it's like to be a really great driver. Like, they've never been on track, perhaps. There's lots of ways to look at this that without any opposition to the thought pattern, they can believe anything. And we see this in basically every martial art in the world. Anybody that's, you see somebody do something in martial arts, and somebody who has no experience will be like, yeah, no, I could kick his butt, no problem. That'd be, when I get angry, I just see red, bro. And there's no opposition to the thought pattern. And so I love where we're going with all of this. This is just such a fantastic conversation. I think not only have we've not only given lots of attributable skills, actual things that we can do to live in adversity and personal growth, but I think also lots of really good thought processes that people are going to have to wrestle with for a little while. And we are coming up on 2 hours right now, so I think this would be a good time for some final thoughts on everything that we've gone over now. This is almost a 4-hour podcast, so the role of adversity in personal development. Final thoughts. Seb, I'm going to start with you. What do you got?
Sure. For me, there's just a few things that were kind of left outstanding, and it's just a few things left outstanding from my perspective. So one of the things I want to talk about is failing and the comfort level that you may or may not have with failing. And I think that it's disingenuous to say, go out and enjoy failing. Like, failing sucks. Like, it's not enjoyable. Like, nobody wants to be the person that comes up short in whatever you take on. Okay, so there are ways to action. I'll tell you right now, in full disclosure, I absolutely hate failure. However, I understand the value of it, and therefore engage in it. It has nothing to do with my feeling. My feeling is a knowledge. Yeah, nobody likes to fail, obviously. It's kind of like the old, belts don't really matter. Who says that? Who says that all the time? Black belts all the time. And so that's a little bit disingenuous, because when you're a blue belt and you've been doing jiu-jitsu for 6 years, you're like, when am I getting my purple belt? And it's normal that you're going to want to seek some validation on account of the work that you have put in. There's nothing that's wrong about that. If you make it all about that, it's a problem. If you make the work about a belt instead of about becoming a better grappler, it's a problem. But there's nothing wrong with seeking that. But once you got the coveted strap, well, now the time stops, so it really doesn't matter. You can be doing jiu-jitsu for another 75 years. You'll still be that. If nobody promotes you to coral, you're going to be a black belt in 70 years, So the time stops. And so I think that it's important to understand that everybody has different processing when it comes to failure. I hate it. I will do everything I can to not encounter it. But if I do, that's over. It's done. Okay, now what? It's valuable. What can I learn from this? How can I move forward? So you're not, you may never get to a point where you're comfortable with failing. That's not everybody's cup of tea, and it may not happen. So don't feel like you're doing something wrong if that's the case. People have just different ways of processing things. So that's one thing. The other thing is the concept, and it's been brought up a few times, that we eventually will get to a point where you're going to be so comfortable with being uncomfortable that you will lose track of what's actually uncomfortable for you, and you will engage in things that are externally uncomfortable to others, but not to you. And you will stay there because you're getting external validation that what you're doing is crazy, and that's a very dangerous slope, because we understand that our growth is directly correlated to our ability to do hard things for us, not for everybody else. So what is it for you? Maybe for you is simply getting out right now and going for a walk And eventually it will be other things once you start growing through that. But maybe for somebody else, it's to do 10 triathlons in a row. You know, that Sandy girl from Kelowna right now, what is she doing? Some crazy thing, like 100 decathlon or whatever. I don't even know what it's called. I don't even know if it has a name. But she, you know, and for her, in order to be uncomfortable, she must engage in something that's completely insane for the outside looking in, right? But she's doing it. If she was to run 4 triathlons or 4 ultras, for example, and just keep running the same distance ultras in the same environments and the same things, eventually this will become, even though it's still from an outside perspective crazy and uncomfortable, for her, it no longer is doing what it should, which is push her outside of that comfort zone. And this is where people get a little, this is where people go wrong a little bit on some selections sometimes, is when they start thinking that because they bring such a good skill set and because they're in such good shape and so mentally prepared that they're going to cruise through all the events, whereas the pressure is applied individually. So yes, you're going to have collective tasks and all this good stuff, and you're going to get to see the person, but also you're going to get tested at your level. If you're Mr. I can do push-ups all day, well, trust me, that's what you'll be doing all day and the next night and the other day. Right. So I think there's, and that means that there is an understanding that has extreme value, is to take the person that's very comfortable with being uncomfortable and put them in a state of discomfort. So we need to understand that. We need to reevaluate. Am I doing things that are seemingly uncomfortable, or at one point we're uncomfortable, no longer are in our, I'm living in a comfort zone and I'm becoming complacent unbeknownst to me.
So this perfect example is Mr. Sean Taylor here, who loves the adversity, dives right into it and is all about it, and definitely needs to have a documentary filmed about his life.
No question that like we can go on for another hour, but there will be a documentary. Mark my words.
Yeah. I just wanted to make him a little bit uncomfortable. He was looking a little too comfortable at the other end of the mic.
It's happening, Sean T.
Travis, final thoughts? Anything we've gone over?
Yeah, just looking at the time there. If people are in it and they're in the adversity right now, it's a long game. Just remember that. And no matter how bad things feel right now or how hard it might be, that's what gives us perspective. That's what allows us to enjoy the good stuff that's going to happen later. And if we can just keep that framed in our head and just to emphasize and steal from Churchill, emphasize some of the things that were said already, success isn't final and failure isn't fatal.
Bam. Such a great point. Sean, final thoughts?
Yeah, it's something that Seb had said on how he was directing his ideas towards failure. And he's right. I should be more careful when I say I pursue failure. Failure is not like my jam in the sense of I'm actively loving on failure. I hate failing. I do. And contextually, there is nothing worse than failing for a team. It's one thing to fail for yourself, but it's an entirely different thing to fail the team. And so what I do is I actively pursue putting myself in situations where there's a high risk of failure. I love injecting myself into a moment, whether it's physiological, psychological, or emotional. I love being in a moment where I think to myself, man, I don't know if I've got this. I don't know if I've got this covered. I don't know if I can check this box. I don't know if this is good to go. And in that chaos and that void of the moment where I don't have the solution, where I might be successful or I might fail, that's where I enjoy being. And if I fail, good, I'm learning a lesson. If I succeed, that's good, but it's not as good as failing when it comes to learning lessons. But that doesn't mean that I love failing, because I don't. I love what comes out of the failure. And I also love the moment that is, in some instances, split seconds before I make my decision on go left, go right. If this, then that. It's that liminal space where, and this might be a bit much, something to chew on out there after the podcast, but if you can inject yourself in enough moments, tens of thousands of moments, where you are actively putting yourself into a potential failure state, it is that liminal space just before the moment where you can actually almost not freeze time, but you can freeze your existence and consider it just over the milliseconds of not go left, go right, but the why of the go left, go right. Understand who you are in that liminal space moment before you go left or go right. It is a moment that we all have, but it is a moment that so few consider. And I'm not talking about the big life choices where you get days and days to think about it. I'm talking about the liminal space that is sometimes milliseconds. That's when you should be asking yourself the why, which means that you should be saying why throughout your day a lot. Particularly if you're living a life that puts you in a space where it is fail or not fail. If you're living a sterile life, a vanilla life, it can lead to a sense of comfort that doesn't have a liminal space. Your comfort is the liminal space. You need to get uncomfortable and consider the why in that uncomfortability.
So who's going to do the chant sign off?
Yeah, interesting moment. Really, we've got a liminal space in front of us. How long do we wait until Chance maybe comes back?
I'm trying to see the monitor there. Looks like we have 3 minutes left, do we?
3 minutes to 2 hours.
I'd say. Do you guys have any further thoughts on liminal space per se?
Not really. This was really insightful. I think we just wait awkwardly until Chance comes back.
Sean, you've been on every one of them. I want to hear you do a chant sign off.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, I'd like to wrap up the show by thanking the guests for bringing the wisdom today. In respect to adversity, there are 2 parts to this podcast. Hopefully you've listened to part 1 by now, which flows straight into this episode that we're in, part 2. If you've got any further questions on adversity, if you would like to hear more about this subject, if you would like to hear a deeper analysis of how we live it in our lives or how others that we could have on as guests, if any of that interests you, drop Chance Burles a message at the collective and we'll engage with that, of course. So until the next podcast, always remember to do your best, of course, every day, as it says up at the top of the screen. And so as we continue to learn, build, and grow together, we really appreciate you joining us on today's episode. Until next time, Chimo.
Amazing.
Now, I don't know how to end it, so I'm
it's
going to
not
leave that to Chance.
It's not live anyway, right?
No,
That's right.
no.
It's
Yeah.
canned.
There we go.
There it is.
Yeah.
Bam.
We're back. Apologies, everybody. That was, I don't know what happened.
Well,
okay.
I had that happen many times, as you know.
You're all right.
Yeah, that was
Sean did our sign off.
We
got
already
a
signed
great
off.
sign. I mean, just like, oh man, I mean, when I cut out, it was you like hit the end of the line. It was such a great mic drop, and then my whole thing just like shut down, and it's like, did he
Your
do that on
computer
purpose?
couldn't deal with the hotness,
Right?
the
Man.
heat.
Yeah, I don't know. So you got the sign off and everything
Yep.
then?
Yeah. We're good.